They were once some of the most feared villains in the Matoran universe, and one of only a few who could claim they had defeated the Toa Nuva in combat. But what happened to them that led to their rise in power, and their eventual downfall? Let's dive in. In their beginnings, the 6 beings we know as the Piraka weren't actually called so. They were just 6 members of a species called Skakdi, native to the island of Zakaz. Zakaz itself was an unremarkable island at this time, until, as is so often the case, the Makuta became involved. The Brotherhood assigned one of its members, SPIRIAH, to administer this land. I'll leave a link to my video on this character below. Anyway, in short, SPIRIAH began using Makuta science to interfere with and experiment on the native Skakdi, in an effort to serve as an army for either the Brotherhood, or, ideally, himself. SPIRIAH was not the most gifted of the Makuta in this field, and the result of his experimentations saw the Skakdi become incredibly violent and unpredictable, but did give them the ability to use elemental powers, albeit only in conjunction with another of their kin. Among these new powers were varying vision-related abilities, such as Thok's Spellbind Vision, Avak's X-ray and Telescopic Vision, and Zaktan's Laser Vision. SPIRIAH also trained them in combat to a certain extent, and as the Skakdi did become formidable fighters, perhaps SPIRIAH wasn't completely inept in that endeavour. With their newfound powers and combat skills, the Skakdi as a result became more headstrong, and consequently unsuitable as subordinates of the Brotherhood, like the Rakshi or the Vizorak. Zakaz essentially then became somewhat of a rogue province, and even when SPIRIAH was exiled from the Brotherhood and Krika installed as the overseer of the island, his orders and policies were not exactly honoured, one example being a ban on travel in and out of the island, which was flouted by the Skakdi and the Vortex of neighbouring Zia. Much like nearby Stel, Zakaz was prime territory for prospective Dark Hunter recruits, and 6 Skakdi would go on to join their ranks, albeit at slightly different times and a different manner. Hakan and Vizok, before a certain accident caused them to despise each other, worked together as thieves and staged a raid on the Toa fortress to claim Makoki Stone. Upon escaping with the artifact, the pair were intercepted by Ancient, who after observing their heist, saw potential and took them to Ordina to become Dark Hunters. When the pair arrived at the Dark Hunter base, they met a fellow Skakdi, already recruited by the Shadowed One personally in a protodermis mine. Zaktan was his name. Raidak, Thok and Avak were all recruited independently at various far-flung locations across the Matoran universe, and would find themselves all under the thumb of the Shadowed One. Vizok, Avak and Raidak were all paired together shortly before the outbreak of the Toa Dark Hunter War, and this was perhaps the first stone in the gradual disillusionment in the Skakdi would develop towards the Dark Hunters. Although successful in freeing the Kanohi Dragon, their ultimate aim to force Duragaduma into making concessions to the organisation was unsuccessful, and after presumably fighting in the ensuing war with Metra Nui, the other 5 Skakdi threw in their lot with the ruthless, enigmatic Zaktan. Being naturally power-hungry and disloyal, paired with Dark Hunter policy to turn in any spoils acquired on missions directly to the Shadowed One, the 6 Skakdi's arrangement with the Dark Hunters was likely destined to be a temporary one. When Zaktan told the others about rumours that Makuta Teridax had been defeated, and his lair was ripe for the plunder, the Piraka, Matoran obscenity meaning thief and murderer, were born. With their decision to go to Mangaia, the Piraka were on a course from which they could not divert. As soon as the 6 beings entered Makuta's old lair, lingered and investigated its secrets, they were doomed. Disembodied Makuta planted seeds of the thought into their heads to travel to the island of Voya Nui and seek out the greatest artifact of them all, the Kanohi Ignika. It was in the foreboding caverns of Mangaia that the dynamic of the 6 Piraka was changed forever with the creation of Vizon. Hakan's meddling with the powerful Spear of Fusion permanently ruptured Vizok's being and sanity, and from that moment on, the Blue Piraka despised Hakan for the remainder of his existence. Zaktan would later recall that this would be the moment all had become clear to him. He didn't know how or why, but suddenly he realised that they had come to this place for a reason. There was something they had to find, but it wasn't here. It was elsewhere, on an island far to the south, and hidden in a place of fire. It was powerful, old beyond even the universe itself, and it was waiting for them. "The Mask of Life," he said softly. A thrill went through him, for he knew this was the moment he'd been waiting for. As Vizok's deranged facsimile absconded with the Spear of Fusion, the other 6 left for Voya Nui. Cut off from the rest of the Matoran universe following the Great Cataclysm, its surviving inhabitants eagerly awaited the arrival of Toa to their shores. What they got instead were imposters. After witnessing an egregious violation of animal rights by Hakan, Balta wised up that these Toa were not genuine and warned 5 other Matoran, forming the Matoran resistance. The ruse didn't last long. The Piraka set the Matoran to work building a stronghold with the assistance of Makuta's essence, which they weaponized and coined the name Antidermis. The 6 strong Matoran resistance, along with Order of Matanui member and Guardian of the Mask of Life Axon, sought to defeat the Piraka. Their plan, however, went awry with the arrival of disillusioned hero Brutaka, who abandoned his charge as protector of the mask and begrudgingly sided with the Piraka in an effort to claim the mask for himself. This cynical alliance was agreed under the pretense that Brutaka would be granted access to the Piraka's reserves of antidermis, which, it transpired, increased the warrior's power. The Toanuva, unacquainted with this type of foe, were defeated by the cruel tactics of the 6 Skakdi, who by contrast were more prepared and knew the terrain. Spared from being thrown into Mount Valmai by its subsequent eruption, the Toanuva were able to escape the Piraka and join the Matoran resistance. Their subsequent assault on the Piraka stronghold, however, was unsuccessful, being swiftly felled by the titanic warrior Brutaka, after which they were imprisoned and weakened by the Piraka's stores of antidermis. As soon as things began looking up for the Piraka, they deteriorated again. The newly created Ignika arrived on Voya Nui to save the Toanuva and defeat the Piraka, and infighting amongst the 6 Skakdi started to worsen. Hakan, plotting to usurp Zaktan's command, used the Zamasphere to steal Brutaka's power, which he did with Thok. With the deck stacked in their favour after absorbing Brutaka's power, the red and white Piraka learnt of the Mask of Life's location and set off to try and claim it. With Brutaka's strength restored with a counteracting Zamasphere, Hakan and Thok were forced to regroup with their fellow Skakdi. Zaktan gathered them up to enter the Chamber of Life, with the Tower Ignika in pursuit. Here is where the Tests and Guardians of the Mask were pitted against the Piraka, including Ernak, a monster from Skakdi folklore, manifested in reality. Having already faced the Shadowed One, and had his body reduced to a semi-solid mass, Zaktan showed the beast he had no fear, and the test was passed. The next test involved 6 beings trapped inside canisters, each one with a release latch. Their instructions, emanating from a disembodied voice, were to all release their latches at once, lest they be dropped into the mutagenic water below. As the Piraka had no sense of unity, this test was failed when Raidak, desiring to get out of the trap first, unlatched his canister and all 6 were dropped into the cavern. The Piraka's fate from here on in was sealed. The properties of the water they now found themselves were already setting to work on their physiology. Passing through the treacherous fiery lava chamber gate, the 6 Piraka eventually, at long last, found themselves at the Chamber of Life. From hearing that voice in Mangaia, they were now finally in sight of their goal. But something else from Mangaia had come back to haunt them. Their deranged 7th member, the half-Skakdi Vizon, now fused with the very mask they wanted, and one of its guardians. With possession of the Spear of Fusion, Vizon used it to great effect and fused his mirror self to Raidak, which subsequently attacked the other Piraka. The fusion defeated the other Piraka before being separated and falling unconscious. By the time the Piraka came to, the mask was gone, and Vizok demanded the spear be used to return Vizon into himself. However, Raidak broke the spear into fragments. Vizon was here to stay, and Vizok to remain half of what he was. With their greed, combined with Makuta's influence still ringing in their heads, the 6 Piraka followed the Mask of Life into the waters around Voya Nui. The mutagenic properties of the water coursing through them has already begun to take effect. They lost their bodies and were reduced to a head attached to a spine. Like primordial life, they slunk from the fiery land of Voya Nui into the crushing abyss, avoiding the reunited tower and the Order of Matanui members Axon and Botar, who had joined them. They were not to evade the Great Spirit's justice for long, however, for as they traversed the cord towards Mari Nui, Axon caught up with them and stunned the mutated Piraka long enough to transport them to Daxia for imprisonment and subsequent questioning. Attempting to buy his freedom from the Order, Zaktan negotiated a deal whereby he would take the Toahaga to Pterodax's whereabouts, knowledge of which he had acquired on a Dark Hunter assignment to a Brotherhood fortress many years ago. When the task force was ambushed by Pterodax himself, Zaktan was seemingly killed when the Makuta leader used his powers of sonics to shatter both him and the water tank he needed to survive. Zaktan's nature, ever since being hit with the Shadowed One's eye beams, had however allowed him to survive, slowly piecing himself back together before travelling home to Zakaz. As Zaktan had been on his mission with the Toahaga, so was Daxia destroyed with the victory of Pterodax, the universe now under his control. Escaping to Zakaz, the 6 Piraka found themselves reunited, only to stumble across a ritual and become part of a Skakdi experiment to create something known as the Golden Being, consisting also of a vortex of Zia, a bruiser of stealth, and a Zyglak from the deepest places of the world. Hearing at the end of their story, after thousands of years of defeats, victories and infighting, the six Piraka found themselves bound together in perpetuity. Their crazed, unofficial seventh member, however, rejected and distrusted by the others, ultimately was the only one who lived free in the end. Taking a step back, we can see that the Piraka were united solely by their violent, deceitful tendencies and their shared desire for possessing the Mask of Life. Though this was placed into their heads by Pterodax, this wouldn't have worked had it not been for their pre-existing desire for power and riches. Their capacity to use elemental powers only in tandem with each other also reinforced their need to stay united to some degree. Speaking of powers, finally we get to an interesting aspect of the six Piraka, that each of them possessed a unique ability. These manifested as vision-related powers, as briefly mentioned at the start of the video, but also as more innately. Most interestingly, however, it is unclear what, if any, the unique power of Zaktan was. Yes, he could become a swarm of protodytes, but this came about from the Shadowed One's eye beams, not SPIRIAH's experiments. There is one theory out there which I find interesting and is supported by numerous events that occur during the story, some of which have been touched upon in this video. The theory is not mine, however. That credit goes to Crow on BZ Power. I'll link it below for anyone who wants to read it. It's pretty cool. Thank you all for watching. Until next time.